seem kind of like fear-mongering to you?
I would say shocking. I don't know about fear. I don't know who's supposed to be afraid. We should be afraid
it's definitely preaching fear. I mean, these are images to shock and then to scare people.
Maybe. I think maybe a fear of God and his wrath is probably a warranted thing to say. Like, I think that is something we ought to fear.
Do you think it's best for us to make changes in society on discussions ruled by fear?
Depending on what you're fearing.
And is it any way to live God, to always be in fear of wrath?
To be in I would say a reverent fear of God is the correct posture before the guy who made us and who could wipe us out with a snap if he wanted to. But there's also a great deal of love and and generosity and grace in between that relationship as well. So it's both.
It also feels kind of strange to bring religion into a debate about abortion. I mean, it's not mentioned in the Bible anywhere.
It is.
It's not.
Yeah, it is.
What verse is it mentioned in the Bible?
Exodus chapter 21, for example, and of course all the chapters about all the commands against murder, and all the commands against abusing fatherless children, and all the value that God places on orphans. Nobody's more orphaned than a child whose parents abandoned him to the slaughter, for one thing. So,
well,
I disagree.
I suppose I feel like that's probably not about abortion. If you consider that it wasn't invented at the time,
sure
it couldn't have possibly. What do you mean?
You just drink an herbal concoction and it causes a miscarriage. It's an abortion.
Back in the BC, you think they had that stuff?
Yeah.
I guess I can see that. It kind of shocks me though.
I mean, to be fair, I don't think that anybody was sticking knives up their cervix, for sure. But there are herbal concoctions, which I would compare to like a chemical abortion today.
Huh.
Does that make sense?
It does. I think that the philosophy as a whole of you're framing it as this terrible act, and it kind of reduces discussion on some of the benefits of these things. You know, like rape victims or families who can't support children, or
Everybody's got a justification for their act of violent oppression, but it doesn't justify the actual act.
Violent oppression against
the child.
A fetus.
Yeah, the child. It's a human being. A small human.
I don't think so, but I don't really want to go on that one. I think that how is it oppression though, really? I mean, you're restricting, I guess, the right to live. I mean, while you're inside of somebody else, what rights do you have to be oppressed in the first place, besides just drinking from the tube that you come installed with?
I think that you have all human rights. You have the right to be not murdered, among others, if you're a human.
Well, if you're a human,
yeah.
This is such a pointless thing.
Like a rock.
Don't think that it's...
This doesn't have human rights, but a human does. A human is a product of human conception. From conception, that's just by science and by logic. To set the limit for humanity, the conferral of humanity at any time later than conception is just arbitrary.
I consider science and logic. This is not going to go anywhere. I just don't think that it's really... It's not... I don't think it's really fair to call it a life from conception. I think it's a much more nuanced issue than that. And I think that some of this feels like a direct attempt to reduce conversation about it. Because if you go into it with that established, then it's much more in your favor to preach your points. But instead of having a discussion be open about when is it a life, if you start by saying, well, it is, and that's all, and that's the only way I'm going to have this debate, you're never going to actually get into it, because that's not exactly. It's just, I guess it's just say it's just disingenuous to start it there. I think that where the life begins is very, very nuanced, and it seems very in your favor to say, well, it starts at conception, because it supports your beliefs and not because it's what actually is true or proven by any kind of scientific method.
Maybe think about it this way, if I could suggest this to you, an alternative point of view. Have you ever listened to a formal debate?
Yes.
Okay. So in a formal debate, you got the one speaker who presents their opening statement, yeah, and then the other guy presents his opening statement, right? They may leave room for nuance during their openings, or they may choose to take a very hard line and for the debate to hash that out later. The way I see the opening of the conversation, these are opening statements, and I know that there's a lot of people.
These are opening statements, man.
Well, opening, to be fair, man. Well, yeah, but people make contentions in their opening statements, and so I just think that it's an invitation. If you disagree, let's talk about it. I could be, screaming at you, or I could use my bullhorn or whatever, and we could reduce all of this to mere noise that would not have any interchange of ideas. But I think that we can have a conversation. It's just trying to start one.
screaming at me or having a bullhorn is a low bar. What you're doing is you're advertising these posters which are meant to guilt and fear monger. That's not saying let's have a discussion. You see what I'm saying?
Well, we're having a discussion.
Yeah, but like, these are not aimed. These don't say let's talk about it. They say like, if you think this, you're wrong.
I'd say it's implied, but you are wrong. There's no mistake. You are definitely wrong. Every point that you have in favor of abortion is stupid and immoral and wicked. But I'm willing to talk about it because I doubt you've ever heard why.
How brave of you. I think that some of these posters are, well, first of all, imagery is kind of gross. I guess it's for making a point. I can kind of respect it, but it just kind of feels like a blatant attempt to like fearmonger people and to guilt them into beliefs that they don't agree with. And it's kind of disingenuous to say that they imply discussion, because they definitely don't. They evoke emotion, not thought.
Okay. Not to me. So maybe you perceive it that way. When I see somebody expressing an alternative point of view, I generally think, until their behavior proves otherwise, I generally think that they're trying to provoke a discussion. And so I feel the freedom to, in a country where free speech is valued, especially on a college campus, I feel freedom to express an alternative point of view. And if I think I can overturn their position with reasoned argumentation, then I'd like to try. That's the way I see it.
That's fine, and I got no problem with you expressing your beliefs. I'm not here to be like, take these down, whatever. You preach what you want.
Hey, you haven't been violent.
I just think that, like, I personally think you could do better by, like, have a table. Let's have, like, here's what I think. Let's talk about it. These are very evocative imagery, not meant to discuss. And I feel like you know that. Like, these are not, like, let's talk about it. These are, like, these are emotional, be afraid, or, like, get angry about it.
They're almost accusations, some of these. They're, like, accusing people of, like, if you believe this, you are inherently a bad person, which doesn't really... That's kind of the vibes that me and a lot of other people I know get from a lot of this, and it doesn't, as you're saying...
It doesn't imply discussion.
It doesn't imply discussion, it doesn't promote discussion, it makes people either scared or immediately dismiss everything because they're like, well, they're not going to listen to me, they're not going to endorse a discussion, they're just going to say, I'm inherently a bad person.
And you could say it implies discussion, but like with the way that you have these, I think there's so many better ways you could say, let's discuss, that I don't think this is implied discussion. I think that's a way to defend it and say, well, it's a discussion, but it's not. And if it was a discussion, there were so many ways you could say, let's discuss.
Okay. I mean, I'm commanded by Jesus to discuss things as possible. At the same time, I'm also commanded to remind everybody in the world, as well as I can, that we're all under the wrath of God. We're all bad people. We need Jesus Christ to rescue us. And he rescues those who are repentant of sin and who trust in his word, not people who are in utter open rebellion against him.
So did his death mean nothing then?
It saved his people, but not those who are unrepentant. The condition is...
died for our sins.
So the
and
benefit...
His love should, as everyone says in the Bible, is his love not all-encompassing?
No. It's true that his love is felt by everybody. I mean, look at this beautiful day. Like, this is part of God's love for us. At the same time, the full extent of his love, for example, in eternal life, will only be experienced by those who are repentant, who are born again, who have placed their faith and their trust in Jesus Christ. For eternity, those who are unrepentant of their sin will no longer taste his love after they die, unfortunately. So I encourage everybody to turn to Jesus Christ, because his love is for everybody. It's available for everybody, but it's not necessarily applied the same way to everybody. Only those who are in his family receive his full love. Everybody else receives some love, but they won't receive it forever.
Do you think the Bible preaches justice?
Yes.
Do you think that within the confines of that like framing, do you think that it's just for somebody who is a rape victim to abort the baby that would bring both the mother and the child grief and would not be raised in a good home?
It is not justifiable to respond to one act of oppression of the innocent, a violent oppression of an innocent party that raped a woman, with another act of oppression of an innocent victim, the child. So the answer to a rape is love, grace, and support for the woman, justice for the rapist, who should be executed, and everybody should piss on his grave. So that's what I think about justice.
Honestly, but I think it might be a bold stretch to say that the victim in a rape is the child rather than the woman.
Sorry, just to be clear, the victim of the rape is the woman. The victim of the hypothetical abortion in response to the rape would be the child.
Also, technically, isn't that like an oxymoron to say that like we should go execute and piss on his grave? Isn't that responding to an act of violence with another?
It's an act of justice. But it's not an
But
act
the
of
abortion isn't. So we
So-
can murder the guy who did it, but we can't like get rid of the trauma that the woman will carry forever.
I make a distinction between. I don't think that an execution of a capital criminal like a rapist, after a trial, is murder. I think it's a justice. It's the just penalty, as opposed to the abortion, which would be against an innocent victim. That would be murder.
Is that God's justice or is that man's justice?
I think God commands us to carry out justice, and then He defines what it is. And so in that case, I would say it's God's justice carried out by man.
If this rapist who should be executed and have this rapist on walked to a church and said, "I'm sorry," does that change like what he shouldn't be murdered anymore?
Because he's
Because he
repentant.
walked to a
Yeah,
church.
that's a fantastic question. I make a distinction. I think we should all make a distinction between like the criminality, like the relationship between the man and like the justice system in society, versus the man and God. He could go rape the woman and then be overcome by guilt, just hypothetically. Go walk to a church or something and talk to a pastor who knew what he was talking about, which is rare. And then like he could actually repent of his sin and be born again. However, he should still be executed for what he did by the justice system of the state. Does that make sense?
So you're trying to say to not conflate the justice system that God preaches versus the law. You think that they're not equal?
Sorry, I'm trying to say that like the relationship between the justice system of a human society with human criminals is not the same as the relationship between a criminal and God.
So where do you derive the morality of the human justice system?
Like what do I think it should be derived
Yeah,
from?
like if the morality is not derived from God in this instance, where this criminal is being punished for committing a rape, like where are you deriving the actual decision? Just because it's the law of society, or
No, I think that's a dead end if we reduce everything to like what society says, because I mean that changes all the time. For example, I mean look at slavery. Slavery used to be legal and tolerated in this country now, but now it's not. Everybody thinks, well, that's a terrible idea. Yeah. So I think it should be derived from the law of God as expressed in the Bible.
I think that's a good philosophy, but a bad way executed because it's inherently flawed. The reason that it was tolerated and okay back then is the society that we have back then was much different in terms of how it communicated and how things got across. I feel like in today it's much easier to spread discussion and to reach new understandings, that it's not really fair to compare it to a society that had just invented cars. Like that's not really the same thing. Now we have like social media. So I think like we don't change like that really, and not nearly. It's not as polarized across the country anymore.
Okay.
So, I'm saying that like, so you shouldn't really keep your basis on God by saying that this society can't have a moral compass because it's so polarized back when slavery was a thing. But I think in today's society, it's much easier to have a strict moral compass.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, I would question, like, what does it mean to say that a society has a strict moral compass? Like, how do we know which moral compass has the correct direction? How do we know what north is? If society is the basis, because society changes. I don't think that's the way to build a law.
Right, but society changes pretty, like, gradually. Like, it doesn't,
Sometimes.
you don't wake up and it's like, slavery's illegal. You know what I mean? So, if there is a moral compass like that, you can get like, let's say you're like on Twitter, which is like already, but let's say you're on Twitter. If people are discussing politics on Twitter and you read that stuff, you're probably not gonna like wake up to a new moral compass. The moral compass changes, yes, society does change, and you should obviously base your own moral compass on what you believe in your own experiences. But I don't think that you should disregard society's moral compass because it changes. It changes, but it's able to follow it. You don't necessarily have to agree with it, but it is there, and it is able to be followed. And to dismiss it and go with like God's moral compass because it changes isn't a good logic. Like it's not a good line of reasoning. You should have your own beliefs for whatever reason, but you shouldn't like dismiss society's beliefs because they change. Because everyone changes, and God's beliefs
Except
change.
God. God doesn't change.
They preach that He doesn't change, but if you look at the Old Testament to the New Testament, a lot of the teachings are different now.
No, they're not.
Not necessarily. Because the laws of the Old Testament are fulfilled in Christ.
Some of them. It just depends. 'Cause there's theology behind that. So I would make a distinction in the Old Testament law between ceremonial law, which has to do with purity so that you could enter in God's presence for worship, which is fulfilled in Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, rendering everybody who belongs to Him able to approach God in worship at any time. However, the civil and criminal codes of the Old Testament, I think, are still applicable for society today. We should build our society around them. I don't think we're anywhere close to doing that, but I think that's what ought to be.
Stone the divorcees.
Do you think the morality?
Not divorcees, but open adulterers.
Do you think the morality exists outside of God?
Yeah, but I mean, God's law stands above moralities to judge the proposed moralities of men, is what I would say.
Wait, hold on. You say morality exists outside of God?
Yeah,
Isn't
I mean,
that like goes against the
I mean, you have a system of morality, right?
Sure.
Do you derive it strictly from God's word?
Not yet.
So I think that you have a morality, yeah, like you have a moral code. Like I may disagree with its foundation and its content, whatever, but you have one. You know, God's is different in some ways, so it is outside of God's morality in that sense. That's what I was trying to say. Like people disagree with God's law for whatever reason, okay, but I think that's wrong.
Do you think there is morality outside of God?
Well, yeah, I think you have a morality that is not God's morality. So in that sense, it's outside God. Does that make sense?
Right.
Maybe
People can be moral without following God.
I guess it just depends on how we define moral, right? But I would say that, like, maybe in the best sense, moral would be following God's law. So I would say that, no, probably not. Like, if you define it that way.
Okay. That's where I was confused too.
Okay,
If-
sorry.
If morality did exist outside of God, then it's like you can't preach His morality as truth if there is morality outside of Him.
Okay.
So
yeah.
do you think like if someone just doesn't follow the morality of God and follows their own morality, do you think they can be a just person, or are they like blasphemous?
Yeah, I would say that they're in sin and they're immoral. Yeah. That said, like I have plenty of times disobeyed God's law myself, so I am an immoral person. Jesus saved me and forgave me, and that is open to anybody because Jesus Christ died on the cross to save sinners. I'm a sinner. He saved me. He can save anybody. So it's not like I'm here and look at me. I'm a moral person. Y'all need to be like me. It's that I am terrible and Jesus saved me, and Jesus is willing to save anybody who understands how terrible they are and repents of their sin.
Yeah. I don't want to. I already said this. I'm not going to repeat myself fully, but I do think that if your belief was really that, you wouldn't advertise it so harshly. I feel like if it was really about just teaching people, you would be like the Christianity groups on the sides of the street who hand out pamphlets and talk about it, and you wouldn't have these posters that strictly advertise like you should feel bad, you are screwed, like, you know what I mean? Like they either dismiss entire points or they belittle, and I think it's antithetical to discussion and not in support of it. And so I feel like everything you've been saying is like, let's talk about it, but everything that you're doing is not that.
I hear you. I would say that my practice, like in my experience, practice doesn't necessarily bear out that that's true all the time. Like I'm sure that that's the case for some. However, if I go out like without signs and just have say text pamphlets or something, the amount of discussion that results from that is actually very, very low. Whereas with the signs, it turns out to be significantly higher. Even this discussion right now wouldn't necessarily be happening without the signs.
I would like this discussion not to happen. You know what I mean?
Oh, well, I'm very happy it's happening actually
Because this discussion I'm having isn't like, I'm not here to learn. If I was here
that's
to
a bummer.
learn, then the discussion would be good. But I'm here because I don't really think that it's moral, and so it's becoming like a confrontation and not like an education.
How
So
do you
that's
measure?
That's why I think that's where it goes wrong. Yes, you get less talk, but the talk that you're getting is not in the interest of teaching people or creating understanding. It's in strife and conflict.
I don't know, man. I've been doing this like 13 years, and often I find my experience is not what you're saying. So I don't know. I think in some ways I'm an authority on this particular question because I've done it so much, and I just think that that's a mistaken point of view.
So, personally, as a woman, walking by, seeing these signs does not make me interested about your cause. It makes me afraid to even interact. Right.
Even interact is what you said. Okay.
Yeah, it makes me afraid to have this discussion because I, like, as someone who could potentially need an abortion, like if I was raped or if I had an ectopic pregnancy and I needed that abortion to survive, then, like, this does not make me feel safe on this campus.
And they're pretty violent imagery. Like it doesn't promote discussion. It promotes almost like this. It puts you in this very radical spot on the discussion that makes it not seem like, oh, I could be well mannered and let's talk about it. It makes it seem like you would be like, you know, fire and brimstone, like smite the sinners, like, you know what I mean? Like you would have like lightning strike behind
There's
you.
like two guys. We're like two
It's
guys.
not
How are we
about
going to smite
numbers, though.
anybody?
It's not about the
We're
numbers.
armed with paper and Bibles.
Well, yeah, but if you've
And
seen
pictures.
other people on campus that are pastors, I have been followed and yelled at by some of them before.
That does not surprise me, and please allow me to say that those guys disgust me. I have rebuked many of them to their face, and they hate my guts.
I know.
So on behalf of kind of like people who go on campus and talk about things publicly like this, I think that's awful, and I wish it never happened.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those things where going onto campuses with all of this, it kind of feels almost as if you guys are acknowledging it, but not really doing anything about realizing that we get those people all the time, and so when we see all this violent imagery, a lot of us assume you're going to be just like them,
Yeah.
because we haven't been able to have a conversation like this yet.
And then you
I'll be
do all that
fully
and say
honest.
you're implying discussion.
Yeah, and I'll be fully honest, the only reason I came over here was because I was waiting for someone else that was a guy to come over here, because I didn't feel safe coming over here to have a discussion, because I didn't feel I'd be listened to, and I didn't feel safe coming over here by myself.
I'm glad that a situation did arise that you did come over so that we could have a discussion for sure. I don't agree with you about the necessity of kind of presenting a thing that explicitly says please let's discuss. So I just don't agree with you about that premise, I guess. I'm sorry they didn't feel safe necessarily. At the same time, this is a violent crime that's happening to millions of children every year, and at some point you have to expose it. I mean, do you guys know much about like the abolitionists of slavery? They used to carry around bloodied chains and clink them in the streets outside of tea houses. They used to carry around huge photographs of slaves with massively scarred backs from floggings and such to disturb the peaceful people who were ignoring the slavery holocaust. I think it's a similar, it's not, abortion and slavery are not the same thing, but in that sense, we can react the same to a massive atrocity happening in society. And I'm commanded in the scripture, for example, in the book of Ephesians, to expose deeds of darkness. So I think that's part of what we're doing here.
So you agree that that
Oh, thank you.
children have
Appreciate it.
inherent worth?
Yeah, I think that they're made in the image of God, just like you and I are. Yeah. So of equal value.
Over your 13 years, what all have you done to help those that are in foster care and to help promote adoption? Because, like, what all have you done, like donations, activist things to help those kids? Because I feel like that's another thing, is that when you talk so much about stopping abortions, people often don't see another way because the foster system in the U.S. is such shit that they're like, well, it would be better for this kid to not even have to go through the trauma. Because I know multiple people that had to age out of the system, and they are deeply messed up. They have so much hurt, and it's one of those things to where some of them I've talked to, and they're like, yeah, sometimes in my darkest moments, I wished I wasn't even here because of how bad it is. So I'm curious what all you've done to go help those kids and try and better the adoption system and foster system.
Yeah, I agree with you that it's a terrible system. Like there's multiple facets to the question because it's a complicated question. Somebody who says that kind of thing, you have to ask, well, why haven't you offed yourself? Not because you want them to, but because deep down, I think they know that their life is valuable and that there's something about the life that they've lived they'd rather they were not dead. So I don't really believe somebody who has not yet killed themselves that they wish they were dead. I don't want them to kill themselves, but I just don't believe them when they say that. I think they're saying it for effect. It's like a cry for help, a cry for friendship, a cry for love, or something like that. But I don't think that we answer that by saying, okay, well, I predict that most of these children in the foster care system will endure, X amount of hurt or worse. So let's go kill
So
somebody.
wait, if you're saying that you're talking about suicide, is that
I
right?
mentioned suicide in there, yeah.
If you think that they're not, if they don't mean it, why would there ever be a suicide victim?
I mean, some obviously mean it, but they haven't done it yet.
Most obviously mean it.
Yeah, the ones who did it, I guess.
The ones that tried and failed.
Yeah,
They
right.
definitely
Which are
meant it.
pretty.
They meant it, but then they
crazy
also,
amounts.
there are suicide people who like jump off bridges and survive, and they report that on the way down they were like, "Holy crap, why did I do that?"
Often it's not them that's reporting, it's bystanders.
Yeah, or either way, or if they survive by some miracle, then like, well, I regretted it as soon as I did it. So what I'm saying is, I don't really believe that it should be used as a justification to say I predict that if somebody is predicted to have hurt in their life, we should off them. The answer is something else. The answer would be a lot less government, so that tax monies are freed up, and a lot more gospel into society, so that people are not such selfish jerks funding the military-industrial complex to bomb children in Yemen instead of helping the children that are here in America. That would be part of the answer.
It seems like you're trying to disregard the people that, may, obviously you don't believe this, but the need abortion. So it seems that you're saying, don't do this, you can't do this. I know some of you might have terrible lives, or I know that you might have a hepatotic pregnancy, or that you might have, been raped, and that, your life is going, you need to do this. It seems like you're saying, don't do it, and I know that you might need to, but we're not going to help you.
I mean, except for the.
Like you're not. You kind of dodge the question about what are you guys doing to assist these children that may have been brought into a world that wasn't favorable for them, since that's what the world is that for all these children to come into the world, even though it may not be the best thing for those around the children.
No matter what answer I personally give, there could always be, if let's say that I had adopted 7 children, okay, then somebody could just be like, well, why haven't you adopted 8? And if I say, well, I'm actually in the process of adopting an 8th right now, I'm almost done. Well, why haven't you adopted 9? The question often reveals, I'm not saying that about you necessarily.
Right now. It's not
I can't. I can't for reasons I can't share. I can't adopt any. Okay.
Well, okay, sure. But what I'm saying is
so if you're asking me whether I'm a perfect man, and whether I have definitely given every available dollar to every available foster child or whatever, the answer is no.
It's more about have you given any?
$8.
Yeah, it's not about you have to adopt 9.
Yes, I
it's
have
like
given. I have given $1.
Adopt 1.
Are you happy now? I've given $1. Yes. I don't know what the question is supposed to ask. If you want a resolution, I gave you the steps for resolution. The resolution is not everything that I can contribute. It's going to be far more than that.
But you are still a person, and as you said, we all have inherent worth, and even one person can do something. I feel like, in my opinion, you would be doing more work and towards ending all of this if you really want to, by instead of having all of this and talking about ending abortion, advocating for a better foster system, encouraging people to go over and vote, encouraging people to go and adopt, go over and help with foster homes, volunteer, all of that, because then it's more likely, since it's not something that's as drastic and violent as all the imagery is, it's one of those things to where it's easier to get people to volunteer than to get all of us to feel like we can do something. Because if you're saying that you're one person and you can't make much change, well, so am I. So if I suddenly agree with you, then that's not going to suddenly end abortion either. But if you can get more people to go and volunteer for foster homes and stuff, I feel like that would do more effort than standing out here debating about moralities or if you should or shouldn't get an abortion, if it's murder or not, religious stuff like that.
It seems you're not advocating for good. You're trying to scare people out of what you believe is bad, and I feel like that's slightly unproductive. Instead of saying, hey guys, we should do more to help the orphans and these children that were brought into a world unfavorable to them.
Yeah.
Instead of doing that, I feel like you're saying, let's not help the foster people, let's scare people out of doing something that we view as bad.
Okay, so the foster care system has billions of dollars thrown at it, okay, nationwide. That's one thing. The adoption system too. And so do social services. They have billions and billions of dollars thrown at them, okay? So throwing more money at them is not the answer. And at best, even if we were to address the foster care system and the adoption system, that would still only be an indirect factor in this question. The question is, that I think is the most important, is it just and should it be tolerated to murder children? The people in foster care have already been born. They are not in danger of being legally murdered, but these children,
Sorry.
not legally.
Well, yeah.
Wait, I do have a question. Excuse me. Are you signed up to be an organ donor?
No, used to be.
Well, then, do you donate blood?
Yeah,
Okay, good. So I was
although
just
less since the COVIDs.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just wondering. So, why do you think that other people should be why do you think that they should have to sacrifice their bodies in order to support another human life? Do you think that every single person should sign up to have their organs harvested once they pass away?
Probably not.
Okay, then why should every single woman who gets pregnant need to sacrifice her body to support another person?
Or even sacrifice her life. If the pregnancy starts going bad and it's going to kill either one or both of them, why should she have to sacrifice her
I
life?
disagree with that premise. Doctors often predict terrible things, terrible dire outcomes for pregnancies that do not come to pass. The answer for a serious medical problem is medical care and careful treatment of the problem, not, hey, just kill somebody.
And Abortion is medical care, though.
I don't agree. I think that it's a murderous act, a barbaric atrocity,
I have
not a
seen
medical
two
act.
people that I know who
Didn't
both had
you
pregnancies
say
go
that it
bad,
was a person
that
that
both
they're
died.
supporting?
So are you saying
Did they
that
get
that
medical
could have
care?
been prevented?
Did they get medical care?
That they are
They did.
supporting?
Yes,
That
they
sucks.
tried.
I am sincerely sad to hear
Why
that.
should, like,
I'm glad they
She
didn't become a
supported the
murderer,
person
though.
that didn't win. That's what he's quoting.
So you're saying that you're glad that they're dead?
No.
As long as they're not
I
a
said,
murderer.
I literally said the exact opposite. I thought you were being an honest person. Now it
I
seems
am.
that you just injected some dishonesty, and I don't appreciate it. I thought we were having a nice conversation. I
am.
literally just said, I'm sincerely sad that they're dead. I'm glad that they did not become a murderer.
Well, that's kind of like contradicting because they did everything they could except for get an abortion, but they still died.
Sometimes people die in this world, and that's not to make light of it. This is a world where everybody dies. Sin is in the world, and people die, sometimes untimely deaths. But that does not, because you think you're going to die in a given way, does not justify killing an innocent person.
I think the stance on like, oh, if you're gonna have a pregnancy that is predicted to go bad, just get medical care. That's kind of
So
like
I have
that's.
a question. Do you know what an ectopic pregnancy is?
Yes.
Okay, so in that situation, the only solution is most of the time, the only solution is either abort the fetus or the mother dies. In that situation, there is no good option other than abort the fetus, in my opinion. What is your solution?
Okay, there is a third way, which involves medical care. For example, there's numerous avenues to pursue. One of them is surgically relocating the child inside the uterus. Okay, nobody said it's easy, but that's better than murdering somebody.
But it doesn't always work.
Yeah, I know.
Saying that it's a 100%
Dude,
success rate.
everybody dies. Everybody dies. And there's always suffering in the world. Always. That's why we need Jesus to rescue us from this world when we're dead. We need eternal life. But what we do in this life, what we're commanded by our Creator, is not to murder, even if we think the existence of somebody else might accidentally cause us harm in the future. For all I know, you could hit me in your car later today and kill me or whatever. Or maybe you're walking across the road and I swerve and hit, I don't know. I could think that maybe you're accidentally going to cause serious harm to me in the future. Does that justify me shooting you right now? No. So always measure it against what the other outcome is. Also, I know somebody personally who has had 2 ectopic pregnancies, didn't have to go through surgery, and was able to bring both to term.
But it's not a murder. It's just stopping the support, like using your body to support another person's body, and you are not obligated to support another person's body using your own.
You are if you're changing the argument for one thing, but you are if you bring that person into existence for one thing. You're also commanded by your Creator not to. And thirdly, I could just say that I'm not killing you, I'm just cutting off the blood supply to your head by decapitating you.
Do you think
But
there's
I'm
an
using
argument
my
in
body.
favor of the pro-life standpoint that is outside of God? I think there's a good argument in favor of it.
Yeah. I think the pro-abortion argument loses at every arena, even if we remove God. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so my question is like, because obviously it's easier to argue, from a non-religious standpoint, because most likely the people you're arguing against aren't going to even accept the premise that God exists. So how would you argue in favor of being pro-choice or pro-life if you were going to kind of not acknowledge it?
Well, the thing is, like, we could talk about science and when humanity, when life begins, or what human conception consists of, and all that kind of stuff. But if we live in a universe where there is no God, then there are no moral duties of any kind. Period. Any moral duty you think exists is only in your imagination, and it may be by agreement of people whose limits you don't know, whose parameters you don't know, whose opinions you're not sure of. Maybe they wrote their names on a squiggly piece of paper with, on fancy parchment and signed it, and they're like, John Hancock. Wow! Now rights exist. That's not how rights come into existence.
Right. How do
There's
rights come
no
into existence?
God's commands.
Is that the only way rights come into existence?
Until somebody gives me another option, yes. I don't think that rights come into existence just because people say so.
I completely agree.
So if there's no God, then how are what human rights exist and how would we know them? I don't think there's an answer to that question. If there's no God. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is about to get a little philosophical, so I'm just going to
I think we can use simple enough language that even people who've never heard that can understand it. Like, if this universe is just matter in motion, that's it, then what is a right made of? What elements? What's its atomic number?
Okay, for
What's its
example,
chemical composition?
if we were to acknowledge just a few basic assumptions, like that we exist, for example, just basic metaphysical things that most people would agree on, so would you agree that you own yourself in the sense that you control your faculties, no one else has a right to control your faculties?
No,
etc.,
I do not agree. also human societies have the right to restrict my behavior by means of laws in certain ways.
Right, but you still own yourself. They're inflicting something upon you. They're forcing you to do something, but you are willfully or even unwillfully acknowledging that, and you're acting according to your own faculties, right?
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, do you believe in like not necessarily the free will argument, but like do you believe that you are a self-owner in the sense that you control your faculties in the same way that if you know that camera is yours, you control the camera. I would not be just in taking the camera from you.
Yeah, probably would be.
Okay, so could you not then argue that that is a right? Like you have a right to self-ownership in that sense because, I mean, even by having this conversation, you're implicitly acknowledging that you are a self-owner by even talking to me right now. I mean, you're exercising your faculties in doing so.
That makes sense.
So, to me, that is something that exists outside of any like God-granted morality, self-ownership.
Okay. I would ask you, does a moral duty exist to respect that right in somebody else?
A moral duty? I think it's more relating to what is just and what is unjust, because if I am implicitly also acknowledging that I am a self-owner, and right now I'm obviously respecting, your right to self-ownership. If not, if we were disagreeing right now, I could just punch you in the face, take your camera, and run off, right?
Okay.
So I think by acknowledging your own self-ownership, you're kind of implicitly agreeing to the fact that that does exist, and you're deliberately respecting that right in the same sense. It's kind of impossible for you not to.
Agreed.
Unless
I do think that this universe belongs to God and that I'm a creation of God. So that motivates my behavior intentionally. Does that make sense? Like I deliberately respect it because of God's commands. But I believe that somebody who is like an atheist, for example, does also often live that way because they're created in the image of God and because God has put certain moralities in the hearts, even if people don't explicitly give him credit.
But would you not say that self-ownership in that sense is universal? Because even someone who doesn't believe in God would still be constantly exercising that concept.
Yes.
Right. So, would you agree that it exists outside of God? I mean,
No.
obviously.
No.
I mean, you don't think anything exists outside of God, at least, like because everything's created by God, right?
If God doesn't exist, that could be
you can derive that logically without God. Is what I guess I would say.
So if God doesn't exist, you may say that people believe that way, and you may suggest that according to all of my survey data, everybody that I've so far surveyed feels that way.
Well, that's not true. Because it's implicit in every action.
Well, maybe somebody acts a different way based on different presuppositions. They come to the same conclusion with a different line of reasoning.
Right. So, can you come to the line of reasoning that you're a self-owner outside of basically what I just outlined? Like, because in any action at all, I mean, even when you're just like standing on that, like, your brain is controlling that fact.
Well, what I was suggesting is take the Hindu worldview, for example, monism. Okay, so everything being one. A Hindu, like somebody who's trying their best to be consistent with monism is not going to come to, they're not going to use the same pathway to get to the same conclusion that they're going to get mad if you steal their camera. Heck, they may not even get mad if you steal their camera. They may act just because they think that that's part of us moving within the monos, without getting there that way. So no, I don't think that it exists. But I'd say an even more important question would be that if there's no God, you and everybody that you talk to may believe that they're self-owners, but why does anybody have a moral duty or obligation to respect that?
Well, I wouldn't say they do per se, but I'm just saying that it's just to respect it. Because it's implicit in every action that we are, I mean, we're literally exhibiting the fact that we're self-owners by doing any sort of action, right?
What does just mean?
Well, that's what I was about to get into.
Oh, okay.
So since every single person, without exception, is always acting as a self-owner, we can derive that any violation of that is unjust. Because, like, if I were to inhibit like your ability to like your own self-ownership or something like that, like if I walk up to you and I chop your arm off, like you own your arm in that sense. So I've basically committed like a theft against you, right? And obviously you're like, okay, well, why is theft wrong? In that sense, it's because we can just easily say, okay, if I'm a self-owner, it can be no other way unless I like voluntarily cut my arm off and give it to you. Then anything that my brain tells me that is acceptable or at least like permissible for my body to do, like if I desire to cut my arm off and give it to you, I'm free to do that because I own it, right? And you can kind of just acknowledge that without having to think of whether or not it's right or wrong. So if someone against your will comes up to you and cuts your arm off against your will because this is your arm, then you can just imply, okay, like you had a rightful claim to it, because why would they have a rightful claim to it if they're a self-owner? And they're also implicitly accepting that those are the premises.
hear you saying is that people think a thing about them owning their body, but I don't see how we get to any universal concept that implies that imposes a duty with any authority on anybody else.
Right, I'm gonna like move because I'm getting beamed by the sun right
Yeah,
now.
for sure. But we can move in the shade actually. I got about 10 minutes before I got to go as well,
Alright,
so
yeah.
and I'll give you the last word. But we still got a few more exchanges to go.
Are you guys gonna be back here?
Maybe I will. There's some other guys who hold signs and who engage in conversation
I've
like
talked
this.
to them before.
Okay, like Russell and Sam and James and Rachel and these guys. They're from Norman.
Okay, yeah, I don't
So
remember.
they'll be up here.
It was
I think, as well.
last year, I think was the last time I talked to
Okay.
them.
People should be back. Yeah, I mean I have to come back too. I'm from Tulsa, so I can sometimes get days off, sometimes I can't.
I guess like back to my point, like and the concept I'm talking about is called argumentation ethics. We'll like look at it later, but like so it basically says that it's impossible for you to exhibit in any manner that you are not a self-owner, right? Because if, for example, I say I do not own myself, in the act of doing that, I'm expressing that I do own myself. It's like aprioristically true because it's self-evident, right? It's axiomatic. So in that sense, if it's impossible for me to act against my nature in that sense, everyone is a self-owner. Like because like if I talk to you and you say that, then you're obviously just showing that you're a self-owner, right? So it's kind of acknowledged by everyone. And then if you own yourself, right, and we accept that to be true, you basically acknowledging that as some sort of like it's universifiable. Like if you're looking at the Kantian imperative, I mean like anyone can be a self-owner and anyone can do that. Everyone's capable of respecting others' right to self-ownership. But when it comes to like justifying self-ownership in general, it's just because like
If you want to move it aside to see it, for sure. Go ahead. Just don't damage it. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's not saying that you necessarily like have any sort of positive obligation. It's just saying what you can't do. Like I can't violate your right to self-ownership, or I'm obviously forfeiting my own. Like if I think it's permissible for me to cut off your arm, then why isn't it permissible for you to cut off mine? Right.
Well,
so we're kind of like deducing something.
Maybe I'd respond that I feel more power and I want to.
Right, but in that sense, you're violating my self-ownership, right?
So what?
So what?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're sacrificing your own. I mean,
So what? But I'm more powerful and I can prevent you from doing that. Let's just say that I had.
Yeah.
Let's say that I had an overweening, arrogant like self-image, and I
this
believed
is
that
like
I could beat everybody up.
Yeah.
So like,
Okay, so just because like you can doesn't. I mean, it's arguing from like egoism, saying like, okay, well, like anything I can do, I should be able to do because I'm capable. Then it's not wrong, right?
So you're the one imposing a should or should not, right? I don't
yeah.
think that if God exists, there's any should or should not outside of one's own personal opinion.
So you don't think that you can bridge the Azad gap without God?
Correct.
Okay, so
Like Hume.
yes. So basically, what I'm doing is I'm not saying it's necessarily like any sort of obligation, per se, but like yes, you absolutely can come up and just beat me up if you feel like it. But I'm saying that by doing that, you're expressing that you do not respect my sense of self-ownership, which I think exists intrinsically, right?
Okay.
So even then, it's like if everyone is also acknowledging that at any time, if they at any point decide, I don't care to respect that anymore, they're just exhibiting that they're like just acting against something that's inherently true for all human beings, right? So that's where you derive that it's wrong, or that it's permissible for you to at least like defend yourself in the sense that you are your own property.
Okay. I don't think it bridges the Azad gap still. No.
Okay.
I understand
That's a common
the.
argument against it. It's actually something I kind of struggle against as well. But like,
Yeah.
just kind of like,
Well, it's better than desire utilitarianism. I'll give you that.
well, absolutely.
And it's better than evictionism.
Oh, you're familiar with evictionism?
Yeah, man.
Okay, we had Walter Block on campus.
Been doing this a while.
Yeah, Walter Block was on campus last night.
I don't know that name. Is he?
He's the guy who came up with evictionism.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I just knew it from some purveyors.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah. Here? Met anybody here?
in OU.
Oh, wow.
I used to live in Norman for a long time.
Yeah, that's like a very unpopular opinion, unfortunately. That's the opinion I have, unfortunately. Interesting.
Yeah. Would you say that this what you've been expressing does it pair very well with like a libertarian politic?
Yeah, it's like the foundation of libertarian ethics.
Okay.
Yeah.
I listen to a lot of libertarian like podcasts and such. Well, for example, like Dave Smith or Tom Woods, I find okay. He's a or like Charlie Robinson's Macroaggressions podcast, and a couple others. There's a newer one, a guy named Clint Russell.
You should listen to Bob Murphy.
Bob Murphy.
Bob Murphy.
Okay. It's also my
He's
ambition
a-
at some point to read some law part.
He's a Christian and he's a libertarian on this.
Okay.
So
That
there's
matches
some-
pretty closely, like, wherever Billy went, the other guy, his dad. Okay. Our politics is very similar to that. I call myself a theonomist, which means I think that God's law should be the structure of society, as we discussed, but that looks a lot like a libertarian anarchist society in most respects. Yeah, at least I'm glad that my instincts were correct about what the argument sounds like.
Yeah. It's I mean, argumentation ethics is basically accepted as the like proof from a libertarian perspective that it is the ethic to base society on. So
I've got about 5 more minutes. Does anybody else feel like I left anything? Maybe I'm sure you didn't agree with me, but anything unanswered that you'd like me to give a shot
Why
at?
the rainbow hands?
I would say that it's because of the part of the narrative of kind of the debate surrounding like LGBTQ and whatnot is the idea that LGBTQ people or people who identify that way are oppressed, and so this is turning around. Like, if you want to see oppression, look at the child who's murdered, not somebody who is getting respect at every level of government. Did you have another thing, my friend, that I left unanswered? Not asking if you agreed with me, but did I leave anything unanswered that you had a burning question you wanted to throw at me before I had to leave? I appreciate you guys' really like your posture and your conversation has been super respectful. I really appreciate it. So.
Did you? Can you repeat what you said about the oppression and the truly oppressed are the children being killed rather than those who are getting love and accepted everywhere they go? Because I don't think that's the case. It seems that by people, I mean, the thing that you guys seem to be like, showing to everybody is that you don't exactly accept those people and are trying to drag them in to almost at fault as because their beliefs are different than yours.
Like people who identify as LGBTQ?
Correct.
Okay. Well, so look, obviously I don't agree with that behavior, or kind of the behavior that is a distinctive of people who identify as LGBTQ, right? Like men who want to have sex with men. Okay? That's a sin. Okay. That said, I don't think that I'm in the majority. I think that I am far, far, far from the majority of anybody in power. I get that there's a lot of media noise about like how the danger that somebody like Donald Trump poses. When I look at Donald Trump, I see a liberal Democrat masquerading as a populist who just uses this sloganeering to fool dumb people, and there's a lot of dumb people. I don't think that there's a real danger right now for people who identify as LGBTQ in our society anywhere on the horizon to like lose a bunch of rights or lose respect or lose like preferential treatment from the government. So that's, if that helps, like I just don't think that they're in very much danger at the moment. Maybe occasionally in like an individual thing, they might, like somebody who identifies as gay or like looks flamboyant or whatever might be in danger of getting beat up by some redneck or whatever, but I don't think in general there's a lot of oppression going on with them.
Why did you feel the need to have them dragged into this discussion? Maybe that's a separate discussion that you're trying to start. Would that be the case? Or because it seems like you're shifting blame and saying that, like, although yes, you do believe that anybody who, a man that wants to have another man, that is a sin. It feels like you're saying that, like, if you do want to do that you're responsible for this other completely separate crime against God or sin or however you want to put it that is also happening. But it seems that I just don't know where the bridge is, because I understand that both of these things you see as wrong and as bad, but it feels like the blame is being thrown on these LGBTQ people, which feels like a completely different discussion.
Okay, that's not what I'm trying to communicate. I get, it's a sign with only limited like space on it or whatever, so it's understandable that somebody could maybe not catch all the meaning that I intend. Okay, yeah, they're big signs, but they have to be able to be seen from far away as well. What I'm trying to leverage, is the what I perceive to be a movement within society to leverage super rights and privileges at the governmental and social level for people who identify as LGBTQ. That is pushed by many people in our society, not just people who identify that way, but also their allies and whatnot. So I think that they use the narrative "we're oppressed, help us," and to kind of engender sympathy and to make further political inroads. So that's what I'm trying to leverage. You may not agree with that perception, my perception of that, but that's what I'm trying to leverage. That's what I think could be proved in a debate if we had more time. So yeah, hopefully that helps. I don't have have much more time, but anybody's last word, I'll be happy to listen to it without a response. I appreciate all of you because you've been very respectful. I know we didn't agree, but y'all were super cool, and you have my respect as well. Thanks for your time, and thanks for stopping to talk to us. For sure. Thanks for your thoughts. And I'm glad that you felt safe to approach. I certainly would never intend any violence or anything toward anybody. So.